Back now on the Pulse, covering everything people, power, and politics from Detroit to Washington and beyond. There's a lot of energy surrounding both campaigns. The Democrats getting a huge spotlight, though with a new face at the top of the ticket, known as that surprise. One man, Mayor Ethan Baker of Troy, says there could be a shift coming to the Republican Party. He's in the hot seat now. He's a Republican who worked for Reagan after he left office as a special assistant. Thanks for staying up late with us, Ethan Baker. Good to see you.
You too, Roop.
So let's talk about this. You have an interesting theory. We're looking at all this fervor, all of this energy around Harris. Yeah. And the swap of the campaign came where Biden dropped out and now Harris is in. That energy, that's hard to combat for the Republican Party, but they're trying hard.
It is for sure. And I think obviously having a new candidate in the race after 4 years of what everyone thought was going to be just a continuation has given a new energy to certain groups of people that has made it that way. And coming off a convention at the national level like this is always excitement. It's about bringing out your base in exciting times. But I think maybe the Democrats are peaking. If I can, I'm speculating a little bit, but I know that these the enthusiasm gap and the enthusiasm, they're cyclical with the parties. And I've seen even in Troy, where our local Troy Democrats, they're really motivated. They've been really organized the past few years, past several cycles actually, and the Republicans have kind of been quiet and kind of rebuilding and regrouping. But while the Democrats are thriving, you start to see the Republicans build slowly, and I see them meeting more, and I see them getting more excitement and more people together. And I watch the Democrats start to, have some disagreements, have some factions between them, and that's usually right before they start to fall apart and the other party rises up. So I think that's coming.
It's an interesting theory, and you've been entrenched in politics from early days of your career, working for President Reagan and his wife when they left office, and the Presidential Library. You helped close that library. I mean, there's a lot of experience that you have. Talk about this from a historic point of view. When Trump was running in 2016, there was a lot of excitement. People said he could never win. 2020, it was such a close match. And here we go again. You think that somehow the powers that be in the GOP are revving up the motors and the engines again? You see it coming?
I think so. I don't know if it's going to happen before November of this year, but I definitely think at least after this cycle, things are going to be really different in the parties at the state level, especially here in Michigan, right? It happens time and time again. You look at the governor's mansion here in Michigan, it goes back and forth between Republicans and Democrats. There's a lot of reasons for that, but one of the reasons is because the party out of power gets really motivated to work together and figure out how to get into power. And then once you have power, you tend to screw it up.
Well, let's talk to one of those people who is in power at a local level. We're talking about Representative Morgan in the state legislature here. He talked to the Pulse just earlier, and he has this to say.
Have an incredible amount of enthusiasm in the Democratic Party, particularly for Vice President Harris and Governor Walz on this ticket, and we have to make sure that we do not take that for granted. This is ultimately going to come down to who shows up at the polls, and we have the momentum in our favor.
Now, whether you're Republican or Democrat, you would agree with Representative Morgan there that it really does depend on who shows up at the polls. So while the party may be rebuilding, the Republican Party from the inside, what about the voter base that's sitting on the other side of that camera? How do you get them to believe that their party is regrouping and becoming strong again?
Well, I think you have to show you're the party that can win and that will win and has the better ideas. I'm always talking about policies. I think ultimately it comes down to how people are going to feel about what you're going to do for them. And that can be on a personal level, but can also be on the hardcore policies and what they're actually proposing to do for you. So if a candidate can successfully explain what they can do for you, Roop, or me, Ethan, that's who's going to get our votes. And so enthusiasm is one thing. Representative Morgan's right, but you got to turn that enthusiasm into actual action. You can have all the excitement in the world and have a big party, but if that doesn't actually get you off the couch to do things and go out and organize and actually make those votes happen, it's not going to work.
All right, but both of these candidates, I know the DNC, you're coming off that big party with, a lot of buzz, but the Republican Party as well, coming off the assassination attempt, getting Vance involved with this. Are both sides equally inept at talking about policy right now?
It seems to be kind of out of fashion to talk about policy at the national level, especially. I think you see it more at the local level because you have to. But that is kind of what we're looking at. We're looking at a TikTok campaign. We're looking at social media. We're looking at sound clips. Everything that we all claim that we don't like about politics is what we're all still supporting and getting excited about.
Senator Jim Runstad is a powerhouse in the legislature here locally as well, just like Morgan is on the Democratic side. He had this to say here on the Pulse tonight.
Thank you for having me on the Pulse today, but it's very clear that the Trump campaign has enormous energy. Every one of his rallies are jam-packed. J.D. Vance is going to be in Michigan. It will be jam-packed. People are excited beyond belief because they know what they're getting. They're getting somebody who could stand up and answer questions, and you have Kamala Harris hiding out in the basement, hiding out, the media giving her a complete pass. When she has to finally get up and do a debate, when she has to think and answer some questions, it's going to be a catastrophe for the Democrats.
All right, that's, of course, one man's opinion here on the Republican side, but he said something about the debate. You talk about policy. Look, the parties are both over. Let's just say close the door on the parties. RNC last month, now this, and now it's time to talk policy. What do you expect to hear from this debate? Is it just going to be infighting, or not infighting, but rather fighting, or do you think it's really going to be policy-driven?
I think it'll be both. I mean, frankly, I think the candidate should sit down like this every night, couple nights a week.
On the pulse.
Talk. Well, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, right.
Absolutely. And the vice president should be interviewed by Roop.
Absolutely.
I think that'd be great.
We've done it before. We should do it again. Yeah,
but,
right.
No, I mean, there'll be some policy. There has to be, and because the questions will drive that. But you're going to hear repeated sound bites and repeated comments over and over again. And we kind of do know where President Trump's policies stand, or at least what he's claimed for the past several years. There is an eagerness to hear what Vice President Harris has to say. You know, her website lacks any specific policy points. She hasn't really talked about a lot of that. She's made some big, statements and talked about a few economic things she'd like to do, but we as an American public don't really know what her plans are as president. And I think that's going to be what she'll be challenged on in an upcoming interview and certainly at the debate. And if the moderator of the debate doesn't ask, I'm sure that President Trump will continually ask her over and over and over again.
Well, let's talk about what President Trump, as a Republican, what do you think he needs to do in order to get those undecided voters? Do you think there's something in terms of his mood and his tenor that he could change and shift to try to attract a voter base that currently doesn't like how brash he is?
I don't think there's so many undecided voters at this point. I think there's still some persuadable voters, just like you saw when the first debate with President Biden and President Trump. People were quick to drop off of supporting Biden. They weren't necessarily going to vote for Trump, but if you lose enough votes from one side, that only helps the other person. So I don't know what he can do to help sway some of the undecideds of the very small group that still exists. He just needs to be consistent with his messaging, which he is for the most part, and he needs to, again, talk about how it's going to change your life if he's elected president.
J.D. Vance called Trump weird. Trump calls people crooked this, that, and the other. Does that name-calling need to stop so we can make room for policy?
It should. It won't. But it should.
Yeah, I should say Tim Walz called him weird.
You said,
Tim Walz called Trump weird.
I think J.D. Vance did once too, but that's a whole other story.
It's a lot of name calling on both sides, and we should point that out, that we're not picking on anybody in particular. But
well, I'll tell you, my former boss Ronald Reagan didn't go around calling his opponents names.
No,
he talked about what he was going to do for the country.
And I know George W. and George H.W. didn't either. It's an interesting time we live in, and one that we'll continue to keep track of on this program with good guests like Ethan Baker, the mayor of Troy. It's good to see you. Thanks for joining us here tonight.
You too. Thanks, Roop.
This conversation isn't over, but we're going point-counterpoint style next on The Pulse. Rocky Richkowski and Sherry Gay Degnago in the hot seat. Stay with us.